You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Over the past couple of weeks, the U.S. Supreme Court has made quite a few monumental decisions for the country. One of them was overturning the Chevron deference. This was a policy that allowed federal agencies to interpret laws if they were left vague by Congress. Now, this allowed experts within those agencies to write rules and guidelines for industry in several different fields. Joining us now to talk about the impact of this precedent being overturned is Elliot Clay with the Illinois Environmental Council. Elliot, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cole.
So obviously we're going to be talking about a lot about the impact on environmental policy, but first of all, I just want to start here. The government regulation is such a key part of environmental policy. For these agencies to not have that power going forward to interpret and write these guidelines, what kind of impact will this have on just the broad scope of how the government regulates?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's going to be interesting to see in the short term. I think what a lot of people are anticipating is that we are going to start seeing lawsuits that are leveraged by industry, really targeting a lot of these rules, saying that essentially the agencies would have gone too far in their interpretation of what Congress originally intended when they passed a law. So this ruling just came down last week. We're obviously still in the very early stages of this, but I would fully expect to see lawsuits coming down from not just from the environmental side, but from a lot of different industries here before too long.
And it may see, just to further explain this, I guess, going forward, I said that this allows those federal agencies to interpret laws that Congress wrote if they were left vague. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it was intentionally left vague. Congress, while they may have a lot of advocates for environmental policy, doesn't necessarily have a lot of environmental scientists ready to write all the specifics around this. So we see it here at the state level too. They will forego writing specifics into these laws and leave it up for rulemaking. And that process is just now gone. So where does the expertise come in a new system?
That is that is like the core issue with this whole thing. As you said, the reason that we have agencies and we have experts of that agencies are to take the laws that are being passed and actually put them into practice. Because a law is really only as good as it is implementable, right? So many of the staff at these agencies are people with PhD backgrounds, folks that have gone to school to study things like air pollution or weather patterns, any of these kind of things. And when you get rid of Chevron deference, what you're now saying is, although they may have made a decision in the past that guided a permit in a certain way, if a court, like a judge, says, I don't believe that that is the way that they meant, the decision is now up to the courts. So you're basically putting the expertise in the hands of people that are not qualified to be really making the decisions on these kind of regulations. And then if it's going to the courts, you also have a flip where it's going to go back to Congress. So a lot of the times the courts may say the agency went too far in dealing with this, but Congress is going to need to make clarifications themselves. Now you're asking a body that is terribly politicized right now, that has trouble even passing things like, they keep passing stopgap budgets, that cannot pass bipartisan border security packages. We've got a farm bill that's almost 2 years late now that they can't agree on. And now you're going to ask them to get into the minutia of how a permit should be written or anything else that is regulated by these agencies. And I think that there is a real fear right now among people that there's going to be an absolute bureaucratic just shutdown in a lot of ways once this really starts picking up speed.
And that's such an interesting point because a bureaucratic shutdown doesn't benefit anyone. Is the idea that the lack of changes from Congress to a permitting process just eliminates those permits altogether? And is that kind of the clearing of the red tape we hear about from so many that are excited about this ruling?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a mix. So I think on the extreme end, there are probably some people that think this is going to end permitting for certain things like clean air, water permits, and these kind of things, which obviously we would be opposed to as an environmental organization. But there's some groups that may think this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to go that far. Like most of the time when Congress has written these laws, they say you have to have a permit for certain things. But then again, they defer to the agencies to write those rules about what is required to obtain a permit. What the industry, I think, is largely going to do is say that their current permits that they're carrying for whatever we're talking about are going too far from what Congress interpreted and taking that to court. What that would in turn mean is that they may still require a permit, but they may have to do a lot less in order to get it, which is definitely going to weaken the environmental, I'm sorry, I'm losing the word right now.
Yeah, no, I just to go off of that, so you're making the argument that this isn't just going to be proactive. This isn't just going to be happening in the future. We can see some retroactive changes. And when we're talking about these long-term goals that we've seen, obviously at state level and stuff like that, are those even feasible if a lot of these federal guidelines go away? I know that this doesn't do anything to change the state agency rules that have been in place. Yeah,
totally. I mean, I think that there's going to be some long-term damage that's done from this, and it's going to be retroactive in a lot of ways. Dovetailing with what has happened this last week with the Chevron deference decision, there was another decision just in the last couple days around this corner post lawsuit is what it's called. And that decision basically eliminated the statute of limitations for industries to challenge administrative rules. That combined with Chevron deference is going to allow the industry to start mounting legal challenges against long-standing law, administrative rules, and just legal precedent in general. This is going to be a very, very big deal. And it's not just new laws that are passed or new industries that are coming in. It's going to be upending things that have been around for decades at this point.
And with all of that happening retroactively, combined with the steps that we're already seeing, I mean, again, this is federal agency, restricted to federal agency. This is not to state level agencies, but we're seeing so much around to stick with environmental policy, carbon capture, and things of that nature, these massive pipelines that we're hearing so much about, these, the actual storage underground. And there's been an argument from people, again, who see this ruling as a good thing, the elimination of red tape, that there's been a lot of overreach, and this was never the actual intent of this decision. I guess just is the solution to too much red tape getting rid of all of the red tape? Or what do you think of that argument?
Right, yeah, and I think that there's like this nuclear option that has been floated around, I think especially in conservative circles in the last few years, about the end of what is like known as the bureaucratic state. I think that has been a very real conversation. I think that it was something that was floated as a fantasy for a long time, but now you see even with the Trump campaign and this project, I think it's 2025 that keeps getting floated about gutting many of the longstanding staff at federal agencies and getting rid of their legal protections. There is a very real movement going on right now about essentially getting rid of government functions for a lot of different things, including environmental regulations. I think it's very real. It kind of, frankly, a little bit scary. But that is like kind of the way it's moving right now. And that's why, this election upcoming is very important. And, people need to be thinking about these kind of things in terms of Supreme Court decisions, but also the functioning of government as like an actual bureaucratic entity.
Elliot, Clay, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Cole.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again next week. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Henke.